So I'm in a restricted part of Sentosa right now, and what I'm looking for is a hidden site that's tucked away somewhere in this dense jungle. As you can tell, it's not that easy. It's cutting your way through a jungle without a machete. It almost feels like I'm Indiana Jones, looking for some temple in the jungle. I have no idea what to expect.
My name is Reuben Dhanaraj. I'm a real estate entrepreneur and a real geek for architecture. Growing up in Singapore, I've always been fascinated by how, within just a few streets, you can see buildings that didn't exist 2 decades ago alongside structures that have stood here for nearly a century. We think we know the histories of the buildings that we pass by every day. But what are the hidden stories behind their facades? Most people see Singapore as a city of sleek architecture and a sparkling skyline. But beneath this polished exterior, there are hidden ruins, many of them with a military past.
We are the first one to go into the battlefield and the last one to come out.
They attack the guard post, they kill others.
No, that's...
On my wedding day,
I used to spend countless hours looking for hidden nooks and crannies in Singapore. One thing that's always fascinated me are places found off the beaten path. Some of the spots I've come across have a military history. And the most intriguing one so far is right in the middle of Sentosa. It's a massive area bigger than 70 football fields covered by thick jungle. What was this fort for? Who built it? And why has it been lost to time? Sentosa. This little outcrop less than a kilometer from the mainland was once known as Pulau Belakang Mati, or the island behind which lies death in Malay. The name is thought to have come from the rampant piracy and bloody battles that were fought around here in the 1600s. After the British colonized Singapore in 1819, Pulau Belakang Mati became an integral part of the defense strategy, centered on protecting the shipping straits. And right in the middle of this island was where they found their ideal lookout spot.
So my research on Pulau Belakang Mati has brought me to Serapong, which is actually the highest point on Sentosa Island. It's just around the corner. I'm heading to the largest fortification complex that the British have built on this island. Now it's been abandoned for decades, so it's completely overgrown, and access to this area is restricted.
I've been given special permission to enter, but parts of Fort Serapong have collapsed over the years, and it isn't safe for me to go in alone. I'm joined by Saifullah, our guide,
Watch your steps.
and Dr. Donna Brunero, who specializes in the maritime history of the British Empire in Asia. Saifullah tells us that the fort, first built in 1879, consisted of 4 gun emplacements. 2 magazines to store ammunition, 2 batteries, their command posts, as well as a water catchment system for at least 50 soldiers stationed here.
Check this out. This is my favorite lookout point.
So for Pulau Belakang Mati, for this island, this is the highest point. We're at 92 meters. And so it makes perfect sense to have either a lookout or a fortification because then you can observe the waters.
Saifullah has brought us to one of the oldest structures still intact.
What's in front of you? This is the 8-inch breech-loading gun emplacement.
We can't see
Yeah, well, I
much.
didn't.
You only have the emplacement, but where's the gun, right? So you can see from here, this is the 8-inch breech-loading guns. Okay. So breech-loaders, they are loaded from the back. They actually named the gun after the diameter of the gun muzzle.
He explains that these large 8-inch muzzles were designed to blast out steel shells about the size of baseball bats, each weighing over 80 kilograms. The gun would have looked like this, with an ability to rotate 180 degrees to home in on hostile ships approaching the harbor.
In a sitting position, you make your way down.
We're going to take a closer look at the base of the gun emplacement, which is over 9 meters
Follow
wide.
the bowl. So you can see how wide the gun emplacement is.
Wow. It's so much bigger now that you're down here. To think all for one gun.
That it's,
Saifullah tells us that the British decommissioned this gun emplacement in the late 1930s. But we found something they left behind.
Is this supposed to be part of the setup?
Oh, no. This looks like a cartridge cover.
Oh, no way.
This cover would have encased the cartridge that propelled the projectile shells.
It's pretty heavy as well, considering like the top is broken off. And to think that this could date all the way back to potentially the 1800s.
It's just been left here.
So you can imagine that the cartridge case, they were loaded from the back of the gun, accompanying the ammunition shells, and then it fires out.
The original 8-inch guns had a firing range of over 4 kilometers. But in later upgrades, the shells were able to hit targets more than 20 kilometers away, nearly reaching Malaysia.
It's not that surprising because of British Empire. A lot of the engineering breakthroughs that were being discovered or achieved from within colonial territories. And defense was another aspect.
Right behind Donna, you can see that's where it stored the ammunition shell placed in such a way.
Saifullah says that although soldiers had some ammunition on standby, most of these highly explosive cartridges were kept further away in bomb-proof storage rooms called magazines nearby. That's where he's taking us next.
I feel like I've just stepped back in time.
Right.
100 years back.
We are inside the casemates, a series of fortified vaults built into the side of the hilltop.
So this casemate, it's connected to the underground magazine. And that's where the cartridges, the ammunition shells, they were actually stored. So we are going to make our way into the magazine.
It's almost this like hushed silence ever since we came in.
This way.
According to Saifullah, before the late 1930s, soldiers would have been working here without any natural or electric light.
See the lantern recesses. We have placed oil lamp, oil lamps to light up the rooms.
What are those things over there?
For ventilation. So the underground magazine is connected to a ventilation shaft that goes above.
Right.
So you can feel that?
Exactly. You kind of get a little bit of a draft. It explains why it's so cool down here.
Yeah.
You really work up a sweat if you're actually working.
So there are 2 cartridge stores here in this underground magazine.
Did soldiers live here as well? Because it's quite a big space.
For forts like this, it's mainly all work.
Right.
Yeah, so soldiers there.
Saifullah explains that the soldiers lived on other parts of the island. Those assigned to work here were mainly gunners, men in charge of safeguarding the ammunition and operating the guns.
A typical example, on a gun emplacement, would have about 14 men. So in the magazine itself, you have about 7 to 8 soldiers running around, getting the ammunition out.
There's a good reason they needed so many men for just one gun. Soldiers had to manually push hundreds of kilograms of ammunition up a ramp to the guns above ground. Donna chooses not to follow us to the next chamber as it may be structurally unsafe.
So here we are. This is the passageway, it's about 30 meters. It leads to the hoist.
Today, the ramps no longer exist. Saifullah shows me where the British installed hydraulic hoists to replace them in 1908, so that soldiers could mechanically lift the ammunitions up instead of manually carting them.
From here to above is about 2 stories high.
Wow.
2
okay.
stories high, yeah.
And how would that happen? So I guess there would be someone down here and someone up there, right?
That's
and
right.
They would just pass the ammunition.
Manually hand-operated hoist, and it goes out.
During the fort's operational period until the late 1930s, gunners underwent regular training and target practice to ensure their readiness for combat. But whom did they have to be vigilant against?
See the water?
So, Don, I'm wondering why this fort was built and why here specifically.
Matter of fact, I brought a map with me. We can have a look at that. You notice the line, so this gives us a sense of where the guns can fire to. So that sort of range of defense, basically.
And you would have a clear view, almost a panorama of whoever was coming in. What were these guns protecting Singapore from at that time?
So the British had a vast empire, and in Singapore's case, it was a major shipping centre. So you've got merchant shipping coming in, you have coaling station with tens of thousands of tons of coal.
According to Donna, in the 19th century, coal was king. It powered steam engines and factories. Entire cities were run on coal. And as a critical refueling stop, Singapore provided thousands of tons of coal to outgoing ships daily.
So it's a major coaling station for merchant ships and for the Royal Navy. So there's really good reason to want to defend it. But if we're looking at around the 1890s, then they're really thinking about the Russians because they saw Russia as the major threat.
Russia?
Other threats?
Donna explains that in the mid-1800s, Russia was ruled by an iron-fisted leader. He was intent on asserting his country's dominance, sparking fear all across Europe. Great Britain was worried that India and her other colonies nearby would be next.
And so for the British, they're really concerned. And so what they want to make sure is that they can defend this port and keep it operational.
Exploring these ruins has been a unique experience.
I couldn't help but feel this uneasiness when I went in. I think it was the darkness combined with the cool air. Yeah, that was a little bit spooky. There's just something about going into a place like that. It's got your senses all on alert, every single sense.
That sense of unease might also be coming from stories I've heard about ruthless pirates who once roamed this region, plundering merchant vessels and massacring crews. Their exploits supposedly inspired the name, the island behind which lies death. It makes me wonder, did they play a role in Britain's decision to construct Fort Serapong? I'm exploring hidden stories within former military fortifications in Singapore and the threats they faced.
It looks like in the early days of British rule in Singapore, piracy was rampant in the surrounding seas.
In 1833, local merchants lost cargo and money to pirate attacks to the tune of over 100,000 Spanish dollars, the main currency for global maritime trade at the time. That's the equivalent of almost $4 million today. Piracy was such a problem that the local newspapers had dedicated reporting on pirate attacks weekly. One account mentions the murder of 14 people and many others severely wounded.
In fact, it got so bad that the merchants had written to the colonial government urging for action.
But the British couldn't figure out where the multiple bands of pirates were coming from.
Many merchant ships decided to arm themselves to protect their goods from the constant pirate attacks, but that led to even more confusion. You see, the British authorities were now unable to tell the difference between heavily armed trading vessels and pirate ships.
Building a fort strategically on elevated grounds could have been a response to this problem. It increased surveillance and control over ships entering and leaving Singapore. And it was likely symbolic as well. A foreboding fort armed to the teeth, overlooking the straits as a deterrence. This massive structure must have taken them years and tons of manpower to construct. I've just come across a surprising claim that the fort was built by Indian convicts. Did the British really enlist the help of criminals to build some of their most critical defensive installations? The claim that Fort Serapong was built on the backs of Indian convicts takes me to author and volunteer archivist Vandana Agarwal.
We always hear these stories about Singapore being built on the back of convicts and the famous...
She spent years researching the history of Indian convict labor in Singapore.
So, could you tell me who these convicts were and why did the British colonial government use them in particular?
Once the Britishers decided to expand their empire and new colonies came up, there was a need to clear up the land, to build the buildings, and generally do a lot of other works that were required. These are pictures of convicts.
Vandana tells me that the British used Indian convicts as a cost-effective solution to the problem of local labor shortage. They were not paid, but received small allowances instead, based on their performance and behavior.
And they were also looking at criminals who had a record of having done work. Were they good in construction? Were they good carpenters? This is the government house.
The Istana, Kavanagh Bridge, St. Andrew's Cathedral. It seems that these and many roads and buildings around Singapore were all built by convicts between 1825 to 1872.
So these stories of how Indian convicts were used to build Fort Serapong, do you think there's an element of truth to that?
I'm not very sure because Fort Serapong was built in 1878. By then, convict labor had been banned.
Vandana explains that the convict labor system was abolished by 1873 when the European residents complained about the number of convicts arriving in Singapore. But we found another document that shows Indian convicts at Serapong long before the fort was built.
This dates back to the 1830s, and it basically talks about some of the Indian convicts on Serapong Hill who were manning at the time a Flagstaff signal station. Can you tell me a little bit more about what a Flagstaff signal station is?
This is a very simple structure with a wooden pole, and a flag is hoisted every time a ship comes up into the new harbor. So Indian convicts had been trained to man these stations. It is quite possible that they were doing the same job at Serapong Hill as well.
This report by a Dr. Robert Little focuses on a mysterious epidemic that swept Pulau Belakang Mati.
There's a paragraph right here. It basically talks about the conditions back in the day.
Remittent fever was so endemic to such an extent that everyone who resided there, however short the time, was attacked, and so severe in its type that nearly all who were attacked died. Oh dear, it's scary. Of the 3 men and a superintendent who were attached to the Flagstaff, 3/4 regularly died off. But as these men were only convicts, they continued to be regularly sacrificed to the carelessness of those who ought to have examined into such wholesale manslaughter.
It's a very powerful words.
This is a terrible validation of the situation that was there.
This place, called the island behind which death lies, really seems to deserve its name. Fort Serapong was just one of 9 forts built by the British between 1829 to 1879. They are dotted around our island from coast to city centre. But the British did not just commission the construction of forts. Another army installation based further inland catches my eye, Tanglin Barracks. Today, it's more commonly known as Dempsey Hill.
The history of Tanglin Barracks is very different from what I know of the place today. When I think of Dempsey Hill, I think of fine dining, fashion, and even a little bit of the arts.
But its history as an old military barracks is hidden in plain sight. Less than 3 kilometers from Singapore's Orchard Road, the first few blocks of the barracks were established in 1861 and later expanded to 55 buildings, covering what was once a nutmeg plantation the size of 120 football fields.
I want to find out why the British decided to build their barracks inland rather than by the coast. To get answers to these questions, I'm meeting Professor Brian Farrell, whose expertise lies in the military history of the British Empire.
See, we're at Tanglin Barracks. We're really on the edge of what is today's CBD, which back then was the entire town. Well, this is the growth driven by the port. Back then, it was really the heartblood of commerce. Warehouses all along the...
Brian gives me a crash course on the phases of British military expansion here. Early 1800s. Forts were built near the coast and commercial district to defend against external threats and quash any local uprisings. By the 1850s, they focused on fortifying their forces, preparing against possible attacks from their biggest enemies, Russia and China. That meant an influx of soldiers into Singapore, and more space was needed to house them. The city centre was crowded and more expensive by this time, so they looked further, 6 kilometers inland at a failing nutmeg plantation going for cheap.
So what do you reckon this particular place, this very building, was used for back then?
I suppose the original intention, given how many windows there are, how big they are, was that this would be a building used by people as an office, as a sleeping barracks, what have you, rather than a storage place for things. But the army...
And Brian points out that these buildings pull double duty as well, with another purpose hidden in its structure.
Yeah, note how thick the pillars are. The walls are very thick as well. There was always the possibility, considered remote, that this could be a battle area.
Robust construction would protect against gunfire and explosions by containing the spread of flames and debris, while the thick walls made the buildings more stable and better able to withstand blasts.
There's an interesting drawing here which gives us a pretty good example of the exterior anyway, and this is very early. This is 1870.
This is the first iteration of barracks that the British built, fitted with roofs made of palm leaves, commonly used in Southeast Asia back then.
The peak roof is very obvious, and attap is a very cheap and easily to maintain material. Materials will survive in the humidity that we have here in Singapore, and it's something that the troops are accustomed to.
Brian's referring to the Indian soldiers, or sepoys, who were stationed here before European troops arrived in 1911. The barracks were then upgraded to the concrete and red-tiled structures that still remain today. Over the years, the military added recreational facilities, including a cricket field, a gym, and a pool.
The Army's really big into sports. It keeps the men fit, it keeps them busy so they don't get into trouble.
Sure.
It builds a sense of teamwork.
It kind of seems like they had a pretty good time here, but well, troops were positioned here, potentially for military conflict. Did that ever happen?
Oh, did it ever? I mean, most of the First World War happened elsewhere. But one very nasty little bit and piece happened right here, and it did involve the garrison battalion.
I'm on a journey to uncover the unknown stories behind British military complexes in Singapore. It has now taken me to the dark secrets of sprawling Tanglin Barracks, which we know as Dempsey Hill today. Professor Brian Farrell tells me about one particularly grim chapter in its history. (1915). As British and Allied troops were focused on fighting the Axis powers in Europe during World War I, Brian says the barracks were left vulnerable to attack. On the afternoon of 15 February 1915, that attack came from the most unexpected place, from within.
It's Chinese New Year. So, of course, everybody's got their guard down. Nobody's ready. Nobody's on alert. The 5th Light is the only regular infantry battalion there.
The 5th Light Infantry was a unit of 850 sepoys, primarily Muslims, who had been stationed here for less than a year. One of their duties was to guard the German POWs that were being detained in Tanglin Barracks. The sepoys were dissatisfied with their working conditions. They were also influenced by the resistance movement to British rule happening back in India. When they heard rumors that they would be sent to fight fellow Muslims in Turkey, they rebelled.
Half the battalion comes out. Some of them attack the commanding officer's house down at Gilman Barracks, where Gilman Heights is now. Some of them go into town looking for a ship. Some of them come up here. They attack the guard post. There are reserve troops here now and some Malay guides. They attack them, scatter some of them, kill others.
Brian shares a curious piece of trivia. The mutineers specifically headed to these very buildings, where German POWs were held. They thought the Germans would help them overpower the British.
There's some evidence for this, that some senior officers had been winding up the Indian troops when they were interacting, filling their heads full of anti-British propaganda.
But when they freed the Germans, the POWs refused to leave.
The Indian mutinying troops, they're on their own and they're desperate.
So how did the entire mutiny come to a standstill?
The police and the military reserves. They're all hastily called out and assembled, along with crews from nearby warships, a Russian crew, a Japanese crew. Over the next 3 or 4 days...
Brian says it took 7 days before all the mutineers were rounded up and peace was restored. More than 200 sepoys were court-martialed for the murder of 49 soldiers and civilians. 47 of them were publicly executed.
From that point forward, there's always a regular British infantry garrison battalion here in Singapore. And there's greater emphasis on the powers of the internal security forces, the security service, to do what they need to do to keep an eye out on those who might want to overthrow British rule or promote nationalism.
Brian explains that one of the measures taken was stricter registration and monitoring of all Indian immigrants in Singapore, and the establishment of what is now known as the Internal Security Department, a government agency that continued operating after independence.
When you hear the word mutiny in this day and age, it's not something that happens in Singapore anymore, but knowing that this actually happened in this very place, there is such a contrast to what Dempsey actually is today.
I feel like the mutiny was just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to unknown stories here at Tanglin Barracks. It turns out I don't have to look far. After 3 decades of peace, an even more violent conflict would come knocking on the gates of Tanglin Barracks. (1942). Global conflict rages as World War II reaches its peak. Fierce battles are happening all across Europe, Africa, and the Pacific. Singapore falls to the Japanese forces in a swift and devastating campaign. I'm scouring the archives to find anything tagged with Tanglin Barracks, and I come across a chilling account of the day the British surrendered to the Japanese during World War II.
And it was an eerie silence after having to put up with all the warfare. And then we had to get all of our arms and everything put up in heap. Then we marched out. But it was a long, tiring walk out there. It was about 15 miles out there or something.
That 15-mile, 14-hour march saw 15,000 POWs trekking from Tanglin Barracks to the prison camps of Changi, and the Japanese took over the barracks. I'm heading back to Dempsey Hill to find out what happened during those 3 years of the Japanese occupation.
I'm meeting with Jerome Lim, a Singapore history buff who documents the country's fast-evolving cultural and urban landscape through his comprehensive blog.
Where we are now, it's this part of Dempsey we call Reuben. We are at number 71, Reuben Road.
Block 71 is now home to restaurants, cafes, and a preschool. But rewind 8 decades back, Jerome shares that it had a vastly different purpose under the Japanese.
So one of the things that happened, in this building was it was actually used to store medicines.
Medicine, right here?
Right here, yes.
Wow. So why did they choose this place to store the medicine?
So this building was part of a hospital known as Tanglin Military Hospital. It was set up by the British, so there was already medicine storage here, and when the Japanese came, they just naturally continued. So during the Japanese occupation, everything was in short supply, including medicine.
And who did the Japanese place in charge of packing this precious inventory?
There were some British and Australian prisoners of war who were sent here to pack medicines, and a few others. They managed to smuggle some of the medicines out to supply their own hospital.
These were not hospitals in the traditional sense, but makeshift ones set up in their prison camps.
I think they all did it at huge risk to their own lives. They were quite successful in doing that because they managed to supply their own hospitals, and they kept, many of the prisoners of war alive.
I'm struck by how this unassuming building was the site of incredible acts of courage, where POWs, even in their darkest hour, found ways to fight back and care for each other. It makes me wonder, what other hidden stories I might find next at Tanglin Barracks? (1945). Japanese forces surrender and the British return. But the winds of change are blowing. In 1959, Singapore gains self-governance, signaling the decline of British colonial rule. What happened here in Tanglin Barracks during the last years of the British military era on our island? I'm meeting a very special person who used to drive a similar Jeep 6 decades ago. I've rented it as a special surprise.
Wow!
Hello there.
Hello.
How are you? Were you expecting this?
No, not at all.
This is 85-year-old Kerry Taylor, a former British servicewoman who was posted here in 1963.
This is, I mean, much newer, but this is like my little Land Rover that I drove here.
Good little surprise.
Yeah, very big surprise. See, I have this here too. This is my army service book. It shows when I came to Singapore, and this is a picture of me.
Kerry was enlisted as a driver, responsible for ferrying army officers around.
I would be waiting to take them wherever they wanted to go. I've driven into Malaysia. I was a glorified taxi.
Aww.
That's it, I think. Yes.
You want to take a seat?
Yes.
Drive you around.
Oh, can I?
Yeah, of
Wonderful.
course.
Thank you. I used to go to the airport, pick up new people coming in.
So you make this route all the way to the airport?
After World War II, the barracks became the headquarters of the British Far East Land Forces. With the misery of the war behind them, life in the barracks turned peaceful. And this grassy patch is where Kerry says the army canteen used to be.
It was more of a civilian type of place to go. We didn't have to wear uniform or whatever. Sort of like a restaurant, club, you know,
So
whatever.
more social.
Yes, the socialising. And, you know, we met soldiers from all the different places that were here. And here, this is us gathering in what would have been the canteen. And it's where I met my Australian husband.
Really?
Yes.
Right here?
Yes, right.
Kerry married her first husband right here at Tanglin Barracks, at the local garrison church, which still exists today.
No, that's...
On my wedding day, we really all had a great time. It was a good place to be.
We're making one last stop at Block 73, where Kerry used to live.
It's very different at the moment.
How does it feel just being back here in person? Obviously, so many
It's
things have
very
changed.
emotional, actually. I feel, I feel like I'm being transported little bit by bit, little bit.
Kerry spent almost 2 years here and left in 1964. 3 years later, the British announced that they would withdraw all of their troops from Singapore. 1965. Singapore gains its independence. The Singapore Armed Forces, known as SAF, is created, and they assume control of all former British military installations. They take over Tanglin Barracks and another familiar place that hasn't seen action in decades, Fort Serapong in Sentosa.
Okay,
Yeah,
here comes
remember last time you had to run all the way up here?
Somebody now don't have to do it.
There's a young man coming up here.
Wow, very tedious.
I meet Winston Wong and Kaw Sing Hong, who both joined the army in 1967 and were posted to Sentosa a year later.
Wow, you make it,
It's quite a trek coming up here, no joke,
yeah,
man.
no joke. We did it almost routinely, 50 years ago.
50 years ago?
Yeah, we thought nobody would have to do it again, but you took the challenge.
These two, who are in their 70s, were among the pioneer batch of SAF's School of Field Engineers stationed at Fort Serapong and trained to become combat engineers. We're exploring Kaw's former barracks, downhill from the gun emplacement. It is now a storage room used by Sentosa Island's management.
this particular room can take up to 15 soldiers.
Wow.
I was sleeping right at the corner.
Oh, wow.
Right at the corner, next to the window. During that time, there was no fan. At night, it could be very warm at night. So what we do is sometimes we have to carry our mattress and go outside.
On the road?
On the road, yes.
Oh, wow.
As combat engineer, our main role is to support the infantry in river crossing, in demolition, in opening of tracks. We are the first one to go into the battlefield and the last one to come out. These are the demolition work which we carry out. We really blow up buildings, old buildings.
Wow.
We build bridges to allow infantry soldiers to cross. So this is a photograph of the Bailey Bridge we used during the time. It's basically 100% metal, no plastic, no fiberglass.
Wow.
And each panel weighs around 600 pounds.
Each panel?
Yes, and it's all man-carried by soldiers. And to build 120 feet, it will take us 72 hours.
Winston and Cor then bring me to one of their favorite spots at the fort, the dining hall.
Training being so hard, you need to fill up your stomach.
So we only have 3 meals. There's no canteen. So we have to depend 100% on military food.
Wow.
The dining hall catered standard military fare to the 48 soldiers stationed here.
This way we socialize as well.
Winston tells me that they also ventured into the nearby villages.
We interact with the community a lot, so we can actually look at where the village was.
You mean today, like right now?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
Because the opportunity is there. Okay, yeah, let's go.
Before the late 1970s, there were at least 3 villages on Sentosa, and the closest to the fort was Serapong village. Today, it's a golf course without a hint of what it used to be.
Hello.
But as an avid illustrator, Winston was able to capture the village on paper.
I was sketching most of the time when things happen. And you can look at this sketch, I basically try to recall.
The soldiers had to walk through the village to get to the jetty as part of their weekend commute back to mainland Singapore.
We have to pass the village, their backyard, their houses. The women folks cook, wash, dry their clothes all in the open.
Right.
So when they are cooking in the open, you pass them, they said,
Saying hello is very common down here. Any villagers, you know, no, they are very friendly. Yeah.
Waiting for the bump boat, it takes about half an hour. Coffee shop is at the very entrance towards the jetty.
The coffee shop is like a community center. And sometimes when there's night movies, we just come down and sit down. We just want to break away from our camp life to mix around with them.
Sure.
Very vividly remember my close relationship with a lady who was a school teacher. Her name is Miss Rupia, and I think her father was the leader of the village. In Malay, term them as Penghulu.
Penghulu,
you know?
okay.
He's very hospitable. When I'm free, I'll drop by. We were in close contact until I was sent overseas for more than a year. My memories of the place is, you know, forever there. It's a fabulous life, I would say.
Incredible.
So if I have a chance, I think I'll retire like that, you know.
I think hearing Winston and Cor's perspectives and stories, it's so crazy to think that there was such a different time, that there were villagers here, that they would interact with the military, and the fact that it was so communal. It was, it's so different from the Sentosa we know today. Just knowing that that bit of history has been eroded, to know that those people had to be relocated eventually, it does pull my heartstrings a little bit. I know we're never going to catch all the stories. A lot of it are going to be lost to time. But just having this opportunity to capture this one story of Fort Serapong and how the military interacted with the villagers here, just such a wonderful experience.
I've been on a journey discovering Singapore's military past, from an abandoned fort where generations of soldiers once stood watch, safeguarding the island through shifting times, to a lifestyle hub where traces of a once bustling military camp still linger, whispering tales of heroism and of tragedy. It feels like what I've discovered is more than just history on a page. It's a past brought to life in memories and anecdotes that reveal the human side of the military world, transforming historical facts into living narratives.